Hello and welcome to today's Textile Talk. I'm Nancy Bavor. I'm the director of the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, and I'm really excited to introduce artist and community organizer Sara Trail as today's Textile Talk speaker. As you know, Textile Talks is a weekly virtual lecture series presented by 6 different fiber arts organizations every Wednesday. And those organizations are Studio Art Quilt Associates, the International Quilt Museum, Surface Design Association, Modern Quilt Guild, the Quilt Alliance, and the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. And today's presentation and Q&A session will last about an hour. And so that we can continue to offer the talks for free, I hope you'll also consider making a donation or becoming a member of the presenting organization. And we'll put a link in the chat so you can visit the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles website. Use the Q&A button for questions, the chat box for greeting others, and the post-event survey for commentary and constructive feedback. And if you prefer not to see the notifications from the chat or the chats in the chat, you can just click on that button to toggle them off or on. And of course, we respectfully ask that you be courteous as you engage with speakers, moderators, and other participants. We're also proud to be sponsored by the following organizations and businesses who make this weekly lecture series possible for free. Aurifil, Hand a Quilter, The Quilt Show, Miss Diffuse, Artistic Artifacts, Schiffer Publishing, eQuilter, Moda Fabrics and Supplies, 9 Patch Fabrics, Empty School Seminars, Quilt Mania, and C&T Publishing. So we hope you will also patronize these businesses that keep this free for all of you to attend. So I would also like to share some of the exciting virtual events coming up at the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. This week, we will have a virtual First Friday event with our artist in residence, Abby Holmes, who will be leading a fabric collage session from 6 to 8, that's Pacific Standard Time. This drop-in event is free to attend, although registration is required on our website. And in June, we'll have a mid-century modern inspired mini quilt workshop with David Owing Hastings. And later in the month, a natural dyeing class with our former artist in residence, Carolina Cuevas. And we also look forward to welcoming back Sheng Lor in July to teach a 2-part workshop on reverse applique. The first one was sold out almost immediately. And so by popular demand, we've added an additional workshop. If you took the first part, she's doing a different project this one. So I encourage you to re-register if you enjoyed the first workshop. And if you want to learn more about these events, please visit our website. And we'll also put the link in our chat. So now I am super delighted to introduce today's speaker, Sara Trail, who will be discussing her work with the Social Justice Sewing Academy. Sara learned to sew at the young age of 4, is now a successful author, sewing teacher, and pattern and fabric designer. At age 13, she wrote a nationally published book, Sew with Sara, that teaches teens and tweens how to sew clothes and accessories for fun and profit. And at 15, she started a nationally published DVD series, Cool Stuff to Sew with Sara. While attending University of California at Berkeley, Sara created a quilt in memory of Trayvon Martin, and her love for sewing and passion for social justice intertwined. After graduating from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, she founded the Social Justice Sewing Academy, SJSA, in 2017 as a platform where youth create art that engages and educates communities. Through a series of hands-on workshops in schools, prisons, community centers across the country, SJSA works with youth to use textiles as a vehicle for community engagement and activism. And I am personally and professionally delighted that the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles was the first museum to present an exhibition of the Social Justice Sewing Academy quilts in 2018. And in 2019, we were fortunate enough to be able to host a summer camp with Sara for her Sewing for Change. So today, Sara will be sharing more about her organization's mission and upcoming projects, and you are in for a truly inspirational morning. So we're so excited to welcome you here today, Sara. Take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Nancy. I'm honored to be here and excited to share a bit more about what SJSA does and what we're continuing to do, particularly during this new COVID transition. So giving a little background, a little bit about me. My name is Sarah, I'm 25. I'm a very old 25. You can rent a car now. But a quote that resonates with me is there's no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. And this quote was really something that hit home with me. It's written from Arundhati Roy. And I think what I learned is coming from a pretty middle class background upbringing. I went to school on Walnut Creek. For those who know, I went to private school. I'm an only child of two college educated parents. And I think coming up and growing up, I've always had my voice heard. In school, I was one of the only Black kids, so I was always speaking on the fact of Blackness. At home, my parents would really talk to me, not just about my day, but about current events and socio-political development, and even in my church community. So I definitely felt like my voice had a say and was respected. But when I got to UC Berkeley and I minored in education and I started doing a lot of classes in local high schools and Title I schools nearby, I realized the lack of agency, autonomy that many of I'd say my peers, because we're all kind of the same age, but that other young people weren't feeling the same level of heard as I had been in my experience. And so that was kind of like, understanding, when and where I enter my own personal privilege on the spaces that, adults did listen to me. I wrote a book at 12. So because of that, I had a platform to teach other kids where my voice, meant something to an extent. But realizing that not all my peers shared that experience, everyone's voice was equal heard was really pivotal to the inception. So giving a little backstory, my great great grandmother, woman pictured in the middle, was an Ethiopian slave who was bought at the age of 13 by a Confederate soldier, some white guy who raped her, and she bore him a lot of kids. So knowing that I'm a product of slavery, rape, and pedophilia, like directly, I recognized that not only was she owned and all that, but she was also a quilter. So on the right is one of the quilts that she made, and as you can see right here, it's like this is the front of a dress. It has literal cotton burrs in it, a few pockets, and I'm fortunate enough to actually have this quilt. It's in a really special tissue paper bag in my mom's house. But I'd say understanding that I know the ramifications of the transatlantic slave trade, and really just recognizing that although people may have been owned, et cetera, they still were created. And so that's just kind of paying honor to, my ancestors that sewed before me. Fast forwarding to now, I've been sewing since I was 4. On the left is one of the first quilts that I made. By the time I was in middle school, I was in a lot of adult level quilting classes. And so my mom kind of taught me what she knew, but by the time I was in middle school, paper piece, kaleidoscope stars, double wedding rings, all sorts of opportunities. But I have to give the context that these were paid classes. My parents had socioeconomic background to afford to send me to weekend classes almost every week for years. So my Saturdays and Sundays would be full classes. And so because of that, I learned applique, I learned curved piecing, I learned traditional piecing, and I really was grounded in a fundamental traditional style of what quilting is and what it can look like. For a while, I'd base my own quilts. I'd show them on my machine. After a while, when my quilts got quote unquote better, my mom would invest in paying a long armor to do it. But really, I'd say from the age of 6 to 10, I was in nothing but adult level classes. And while I started at beginner, soon I was hanging with the big dogs. So they say. This is me freshman year working on a double wedding ring quilt. And so again, I enjoyed it. I was enjoying, but really I was taking classes to learn techniques because I enjoyed the outcome. I'm not the necessarily, most patient sewer. I don't like hand sewing. I don't even like applique, but I'll try it. I'll try everything because I'm interested in learning new techniques to figure out what I do like and what I don't like. After a few years of quilting, I kind of was like, oh, I want to be a fashion designer now. So I switched channels, and freshman sophomore year I started becoming just designing. And so again, my mom paid for me to get a few hundred of hours of hands-on fashion design instruction through a mentor that she found and paid for me to learn. By the time I was a sophomore, I was on Etsy making custom wedding dresses for women who would send me their grandmother's brocade. So I'm really, pretty talented in being able to see something and then draft that, pattern and make it. This is another example. This is ninth grade, made a dress with ostrich feathers, a fake corset, bodice, inseams, Y seams, kind of whatever, use the ham and 5/8 inch seams to just make clothes. And so I enjoyed that for a while. And then soon I kind of, again, got bored. I was small, like I'd get bored with things if I did it for too long. So then soon after that, I was like, I just want to teach now. So I wrote a book with CMT, super, blessed to have another book coming out in a bit. But I was just having fun with sewing. So I was like, I want to teach kids how to sew. And we can sew everything from quilts to PJs to tote bags, patterns, prom dresses. Like I just want young people to sew. So it became more of a personal journey to like I want to bring all the young people that are interested with me. And so soon after writing the book, I was touring Barnes and Noble and Joann's and even Michael's, and I'd just be giving sewing lessons every weekend, teaching kids how to sew. And while I was really enjoying that, after a while, I realized that the classes were all homogeneously white and middle class, which obviously makes sense because the class would be like $65 for 4 hours on a Saturday. Plus, you had to buy all the accoutrements and my book to even get into the entry in the door. After a few conversations with Joanne's, can we do anything free? Can we have sliding scale scholarships? Realizing the capitalistic industry of sewing and how intercorrelated it is with getting kids who can afford to sew. They didn't just want to teach young people how to sew, they wanted to get future customers. So soon realizing, that dynamic and the role in which I played in perpetuating it, I soon got kind of tired of like being, into that. So I did some design work. I wrote a book. I did a DVD. I designed a fabric collection. And then I went out to New York and I designed pattern collections with simplicity. So this is again all during my teaching, moment in life. And this is all like eighth, ninth, maybe even 10th grade. So I'm just having fun teaching. And then, I have this pattern collection that comes out, PJs, Michael Jackson inspired jackets. So prom dresses, bedding sets, all sorts of stuff. Yes, I'm teaching this, but after a while, I realized I wanted to make sewing free. I wanted to make sewing accessible, and I wanted to bring sewing into communities that couldn't traditionally afford it. And I think what the catalyst for this, we can, I'll send you guys a link. But basically, I was on Disney Channel, just teaching kids how to upcycle because I went through a stage when Macklemore's thrift store song came out. I was like, I want to buy stuff from the thrift store and then like turn it into new one of a kind pieces. So again, this is just kind of giving context on my experience in the sewing world. But I think what like caused me to do a really strong 180 was February 26, 2012. This is the day Trayvon Martin got murdered. And while, obviously I wasn't in Florida, nor did I know him personally, I realized that, like when he got murdered, I really just kind of had to reflect inward on why am I making, with who am I making, with what communities am I making, and is this the best use of my time? And that was again a personal reflection. I remember going to a class, like perhaps I'm sure the first weekend in March, I was learning a new technique. I was in a class with, a bunch of quilters that obviously were more experienced, probably a lot better than me. But I remember like, oh, what happened this weekend? And people were talking about their grandkids and, just retired fun life, that my dad currently now enjoys. But I remember like, oh yeah, all that. I'm happy you guys had good weekends. But Trayvon Martin got murdered last week. What are we gonna do? And by we, I meant quilting community. I meant this class. I meant us, in Walnut Creek. What are we gonna do, in response to this kid getting murdered? And I remember like the questions like, well, did you know him? Oh, well, that's unfortunate, but I think the apatheticness of it wasn't our problem. And by our problem, I meant like the class that we currently had. It didn't necessarily hit home or strike, like it didn't strike a match with them like it did me. I think I just remember realizing like, while these are, I'd say my people, because we all enjoy the love of sewing, we all enjoy the love of learning. These weren't my people in the sense of the same shared experience, the same lived experience, or the same passions. And so that was kind of like a wake up call. And I think what really made his murder resonate with me is he was born February 5th, 1995, and I'm born February 19th, 1995. So not only is he literally 14 days older than me, but it's Black History Month. It's a month that should be kind of, celebrating for Black people. And he was murdered a week after my birthday. So I think it was our month of like what should have been a celebration. For him to have lost his life, it kind of really shook my world up, quite honestly. And so after this, I remember going home and talking to my mom. I'm like, Sarah, if you're so worried about it, why don't you do something about it? I'm like, well, what can I do? And after a few conversations, why don't you make an art quilt about it? And I'm like, I can do an art quilt, but mind you, I'd never done an art quilt before. So this is the first art quilt that I ever made. And by art quilt, I mean I wasn't following a pattern, I wasn't doing a technique, and I wasn't doing something with the outcome to like match someone's design. This is the first quilt where I just cut up fabric, or I appliqued it and just sewed it down. I'm currently on the board of SACWA, and I think this was definitely SACWA Master Art Quilt Book inspired. Of like, I've always admired art quilters, but again, I had the mindset of I need to put 30 years in the game to then become a master art quilter. I had to get my portfolio up. So first, if I could master traditional, soon I realized, eventually I could branch into becoming an art quilter. But I definitely felt like, I was a rookie in this world. But I made this quilt on Trayvon, and then I entered it into shows, just like I did with all my other quilts, paper piece, with flying geese, with double nine patches, all sorts of stuff. And when I entered quilts into shows, I'd say one, because of my age, but more importantly, I think because of my background, my quilts would get accepted. And I entered this quilt into maybe 3 or 4 shows with my other quilts that I wouldn't say were meaningless, but were definitely messageless. And it would be so ironic. Like they'd be like, yes, 3 of your 4 quilts have been accepted. And it was this quilt that would keep getting denied over and over again. And I think for me, that was like the first time, going back to that initial quote, I was feeling deliberately silenced or preferably unheard. As why would this quilt show accept the quilts that have no message, that I'm following Tara Fawn, or I'm following Ricky Tim's pattern, or Alex Anderson, like, ooh, I made a quilt of a pattern. And then the one quilt that I make by myself, and I have a really important artist statement that I hope we can bring up conversations in the quilting world. Why is everyone denying this quilt? And I didn't think it was inappropriate. I didn't think it was political. I thought this was the face of a kid who just got killed. And so to be having this quilt silenced from the shows, and the art quality was, I mean, I'm the same maker. It's not like it had raw seams or it wasn't quilted well. To have this quilt repeatedly denied from being entered was really kind of like a wake up call. In the sense of, I wouldn't say used, because I was enjoying teaching kids, but I was like, dang, like they want me to teach kids, keep my mouth shut, and just keep perpetuating, making patterns and stuff. So I think kind of when I realized that, I was switch roles. I don't want to be a privileged kid sewing teacher anymore. If I'm going to make quilts, and if I'm going to stay in this industry, I want to make art with a message. I want to make art with a purpose. And so I made more art quilts this one is a quilt that was inspired directly from Sean Kimber's teaching of reverse applique. And so in doing this quilt, I did a lot of hand sewing. I hate hand sewing. I don't enjoy hand sewing. I think it's slow. I think it's boring. I think it's tedious. But I wanted to learn the technique because I wanted to learn what reverse applique was about. And so if you've ever seen this quilt, it's shown at QuiltCon. My stitches aren't perfect, but it's really, again, it's not about the process, it's about the outcome. And this quilt is a conglomeration of a lot of names of a lot of people who've had their lives stolen far too soon, in unfair circumstances, for things as simple as a traffic stop violation to other things. So then fast forward, I'm at UC Berkeley, I'm getting ready to graduate. And so I started this summer program called SJSA. It was initially called Threads of Social Justice, where I designed like a curriculum. And the curriculum was heavily based from my learning at UC Berkeley. It was rooted in ethnic studies, critical race frameworks, readings such as Frantz Fanon to James Baldwin to Toni Morrison. I mean, it was just readings, and it was just a conglomeration of a lot of the work that I had, learned at UC Berkeley. That was really different than the work that I had learned in my private school. So to give context, I went to a private Christian and Catholic school from kindergarten to senior year. And so, this was just kind of like a let's question the text, let's question who wrote it, let's question the biases that are there, and let's figure out, how we can, become critical, consumers and become scholars, not just students. So that was definitely the framework for the homework and the educational aspect of SJSA. And then the fun aspect of SJSA was we're going to do research, and then we're going to make art quotes about it. So I had over 50 kids. UC Berkeley gave me a grant, and we all did these mini art quilts that were heavily informed and influenced by the research that we did in the class. So SJSA was definitely born of a mutual conglomeration of a critical education and textile arts project that it still stands pretty true to be to this day. These are the kids as they're working on their art quilts. Every kid had their own quilt. However, some kids would rope in their friends to all work on their embroidery. So like they'd spend 1 hour embroidering one girl's quilt, and they'd all spend another hour embroidering someone else's quilt, because collectively that community, made them feel like progress was happening faster. And then that way they could all sit and talk. So I think it was interesting just how natural sewing came as such a community art form, which I've always appreciated. But it was cute to see these high school kids get excited about making art quilts. And I think what was something that was not only intentional, but was important as I started SJSA was I didn't want it to be the same traditional styles of teaching that not only I had learned, but I had taught previously. When I started SJSA, it's like I'm going to start where I am now. And then if they want, they can go backwards. So when we go to SJSA workshop, there are no rules, there are no seam rippers, there are no forced quarter inch seams, or even the like, standard of trying to meet perfection or have your points match. It's like we start as art quilters, and then if you're super interested in learning traditional sewing, we can work backwards and I can teach you that as well. But in starting as art quilters, not only do the students have complete agency and autonomy, but I think I've seen increased levels of confidence like soar because they're the designers of what they're making. And when you're following a pattern and you know what you make looks off, you can say, oh, it doesn't look like it's supposed to. I'm kind of like, paint by sipping wine nights when you're following like a painter and it's like his sunset is beautiful and then your sunset is ugly, you might feel a little upset. But when you're an art quilter and you're designing your own quilt and you're creating what you designed, no one can tell you if it's right or wrong. So that's something that, is really key to the principles and foundation of how we do SJC workshops and how these young people are textile artists where they're designing and then creating, their own art. We had kids that were on ankle monitor, currently on probation. We had kids that were graffiti artists. We had active gang members in the class. And so providing a space for them to not only sag, cuss, and not even have to conform to the rigidity of what often sewing classes are, but really just be yourself. This is an authentic space. It's not only a safe space, but it's more importantly a brave space where you can, push and challenge each other's opinions and you can feel brave enough to, share how you're feeling. And I think initially a lot of the guys in the class were like, this is for grandmas. I don't want to sew. And then after a while, it's like, hey, it's not going to be the sewing that you think it is. It's going to be, you're just going to be a textile art quilter. And I think once we kind of shifted the narrative and we shifted the rhetoric on what kind of artists they're going to be, I mean, these kids would spend their lunch breaks in here working on their embroidery. It was really cute to see how the passion and that spark kind of got ignited, especially because we talked about the end goal. We're not making a goal in your house or even take home. We're making these quilts to be seen so we can have your voice heard. All of it is kind of going back to amplifying your voice and the perspective from those that are perpetually marginalized. These are examples of some of their quilts with like a few statements of what their quilts were about. This quilt was made by a young girl named Karina. And in short, she talked about her experiences being overly sexualized while writing Bart. She'd be like, Sarah, if I'm wearing a low cut shirt, people ask for my number. If I say no to giving someone my number, she's been spit on, she's been cussed out by grown men because, she's like a double D, 16-year-old with a really developed body. And so not only her fear, but the slut shaming, the sexual assault and the harassment that she experienced was definitely part of the motivation for, designing this skirt. She was like, oh, I want to go get a real skirt and sew it on my quilt. Again, no rules, no limits, do what you want. Another interesting quote to note was this one was made by Yosef. Yosef was born in Ethiopia and his parents were raised in Ethiopia, but he moved to America when he was pretty young. And I think something that was interesting in his experience as a first generation immigrant was how his parents would talk about how the police could be corrupt and paid and bribed off and they could murder people, without any, any repercussions. And his experience was like, it's not that, it's basically the same in Oakland. And so to hear his experience, coming from like his parents, explaining firsthand how bad the police are in Ethiopia to like Oakland police aren't much better. That was definitely, I have a different relationship with the police. I'm a 5'3" female, like he's a 6'4", black guy. So just kind of listening to people's lived experience, it's a space of mutually learning for not only me as a facilitator, but obviously all the students. After the summer program, this was like summer 2016, I went to Harvard in the fall. And so when I got to Harvard, I created a smaller workshop model where I wanted to still make, art and sew and make textile projects with kids. However, I didn't have 6 weeks to dedicate to a full-time summer program. So I kind of broke our curriculum into bite-sized chunks where we could have one-day workshops where instead of students making a full quilt, and by full quilt, I mean design the quilt, create the quilt, go to the fabric store, embroider the quilt, then machine quilt the quilt, and then bind the quilt. In this, workshop model, we would just have them just make blocks. And then I was super eager and I'm like, oh yeah, I can embroider all your blocks and then I'll finish the quilt. And then I kind of, forgot how much I hate hand embroidering. But more importantly, the workshops are framed in this theory of critical consciousness, that dialogue and reflection at the intersection of action can encourage people to become anti-racist, advocates, challenge the forces of oppression, and more importantly, do something. It's more than just like acknowledge homelessness as an issue. It's more than acknowledge houselessness as a problem. It's like, okay, we've noticed this is what's perpetuating it. This is where it is. This is who is affected. Okay, now what? Where's the action piece? And that's really key in how SJSA goes forward with their programming. Our workshops start with obviously an educational component where it's an hour or so of like learning, discussion, small groups, postcards, really just kind of that critical space to learn, talk, think, share, reflect. And then it goes to drawing, where everyone will draw out their design of what they want their block to be. This is a kid's design of what he wants his block to be. This was a workshop in Chicago, and his block is on gang violence because his brother was killed, inner city Inglewood. And this is him with his block. And so as you can see, while his artist statement might not be the most quote unquote well articulated, he's 6. So for a 6-year-old to be able to be making art about gang violence, it really shows how deep the ramifications of some of these systemic issues hit and reach with these young people. Sometimes we have workshops with younger kids and they're not good with scissors. So we will just give them markers, have the same type of programming, and just let them draw. We can still finish the quilts. Although this time we really kind of focus with 8th grade or higher. This is more examples of how kids make this art. It's raw edge applique. They cut and glue their designs, and then they they just glue it down. And when they glue it down, they then write an artist statement. That's really important because it comes with obviously the block. And the artist statement not only shares what they want their block to be, but it often can share instructions for what they want the embroidery volunteer to do. So like his embroidery instructions, hey, I wrote out community in marker. Can you please go over that in thread? So that was, an example. These are examples of more workshops. Again, it's pretty much all ages, although now we're definitely focused more on 8th grade and up. These are examples of just, like one workshop can yield over 100 plus blocks. And so when we do workshops with 100 plus kids, and then we get 100 plus blocks, we need 100 plus volunteers to help embroider the art, because I soon realized I can't embroider all this art by myself. 1, I don't have enough thread colors, but 2, I'm really so the evolution of how we make community quilts, or one where facilitator leads it, kids cut and glue and design their blocks, or full art quilts. Then I take the blocks and I mail them to an embroidery volunteer who are just amazing people who graciously sign up on the website, and they're going to get a block. It's not like you can select if they want, BLM or climate change. They're just signing up for a block made by a young person, and their task at hand when they get their block is to hand embroider not only all the pieces that have been glued, but to hand embroider or amplify or embellish with any type of designs that the young person has asked. And sometimes there are no asks, and sometimes there's a lot of asks. So it really just depends on what kind of block you get. It's kind of the luck of the draw. Then when they finish embroidering the block, they mail it back to us at our PO box in Antioch, where we have sew days with amazing people. Carrie's one of them that are on here now. I know because I saw her name. But these sew days are like, we have days. Currently, we have them in Vacaville, and if anyone's interested, we have one on Sunday, May 23rd, where we go to a shop and we wear masks, and we take these blocks and we piece them into full community quilts. And so one community quilt has 20 blocks, and then after we get the blocks, we give them to Nancy, who's our amazing SJSA long armor, who long arms quilts. If anyone on here is a long armor and who knows how to do like custom long arming, because obviously the blocks need different kind of stitches. A block on like mass incarceration could maybe use bars and lines, but a block on like climate change could maybe use some like flames amplified in the quilting. But if anyone wants to long arm, we're always looking for long armors, as we're always creating an abundance of quilts. And then last but not least, we show the quilts. So we get them seen at the museum, like San Jose Quilt and Textile Museum. Currently, we have some exhibits coming up in Atlanta, Chicago, and Florida. And so really, we're not making the art, with the purpose of like keeping it somewhere in one place, but really to have them as traveling national collections of youth art and artist statements. These are examples of what our sew days look like. We have a bunch of blocks that came from one workshop. We'll pull out 20 of them, and then collectively we'll all start squaring them up. And then we'll all start adding borders to them. And then we'll all start piecing like an improv background, because some of the blocks are all different sizes. And then we get these amazing quilts that are truly made because we have a community behind these kids. So I'm looking at these blocks. There's 20 kids who made 20 blocks. There's 20 embroidery volunteers who embroidered 20 blocks. And then there's 5 to 10 people who came to a sew day to piece these backgrounds. On the left, we just did strips and triangles. And on the right, we went to Goodwill. We bought denim clothes. We picked the clothes apart, and then we patchwork pieced these clothes to make a really true sustainable quilt. Um, an example of how amazing some of these kids are. This is Becca. Becca was in a workshop that we had in Oakland. Was like near Skyline High School. And so we had these workshops, and one of the main rules in when I have a workshop is I'm giving you a block background, and the most important thing is don't cut your block background, because that's your foundation for your piece. So they'll get gray, white, off-white, cream. We have a lot of colors. They pick their background color, and then they're supposed to just glue their pieces to their block. And it's like I tell them not to cut their block background, because sometimes people will cut a heart out of their background, and then they have a heart cut out of their background, and they're like, oh, I need a new block. And Kona cotton is expensive, so please don't cut your block background. But I'll never forget, within 5 minutes after explaining the rules to everyone, Becca was the only one in the class who immediately cut a big hole in her block background. And I was like, Becca, that's your block background. Like, we talked about it. And she's like, oh, I know, Sarah, but it's part of my design idea. I have something that needs to burst through the block. And I was like, oh, okay, well, good to know. Thanks for letting me know. Let me know if you need any help. And what was so interesting is Becca is a foster kid and has an older non-binary sibling who wouldn't be adopted by her foster family because of low-key homophobia and other forms of issues that her brother may be facing. So they're currently in a like a restorative STRTP, which is like a therapeutic group home for foster kids. But basically her block was about how we need to move beyond the gender binary and accept people for who and where they are, and kind of just understand that if someone wants to paint their fingernails, let them. If they want to identify as non-conforming, let them. And so I think the empathy that this 12-year-old and understanding that I think even a lot of adults have a long time to get comfortable with was just really refreshing. And I think what was interesting is, one, she didn't follow the rules, but really there are no rules, because let's just say if you don't want to follow the rules, go for it. I'm just giving some suggested guidelines and best practices. And I think what was more important to look is, if you look at her finished block, she asked for her male silhouette to be embroidered in pink, and she asked for her female silhouette to be embroidered in blue, kind of playing on those gender associated color lines. And the embroidery volunteer went above and beyond that and embroidered a suit and tie over the female silhouette and embroidered a dress over the male silhouette, and then tacked all her broken pieces that kind of pushing through. And I think something else interesting to note is her original design had beyond as one word, binary is one word, but as she soon realized cutting out letters, it's not that easy, small letters. So she had to make beyond the binary, 2 words or 2 lines for these 2 words, just because she didn't have the skills to cut out 1-inch letters. But guess what? That's okay. Her block, her design, her choice. And so this is an example of just some of these blocks made by absolute middle schoolers. And as you look at this one, hangers being used for abortions, equal education for girls, particularly her artist statement talks about what's happening in India, vote, removing orange subber stains, and even this one, the Khalif Browder documentary that was recently watched. All these kids have such vast and such, they just have so many ideas, and a community quilt really is a conglomeration of the ideas reflected from a certain community. More than just making block workshops, we have full day workshops where kids can come and make a full mini art quilt. And in this, they'll just make the top, but it'll be like an 8-hour workshop, and they'll come in with the design. This is Brian's quilt. Brian's quilt is pretty powerful, as it has a lot of silhouettes on nooses. And as you read his artist statement, he talks about the trials and struggles he has as a 260-pound Black guy growing up in Oakland, and how the fact of Blackness has people crossing the street when he's walking around, and how his parents always tell him, smile, don't wear a hoodie, and really just his lived experiences growing up in inner city Oakland. And so I think as these kids create art, what was interesting is the volunteer that he got paired with happened to be a really cool fabric dyer. So not only did the volunteer help him piece this quilt and applique the stars, but she also let him come over and they hand dyed the fabric for his American flag, and it's called Blood, White, and Blue, and it really just kind of represents true and raw American history and the blood that's on this country as a nation. And I think what's even more important is in the instructions to the embroidery volunteer, he asked for embroidery outlines of silhouettes that are shooting people and getting shot, as you can see in this small subliminal one there, and the nooses that were embroidered here. I mean, it's really a powerful quilt. I'd encourage all of you to go to the website and read his artist statement. This is another kid. When I say these kids have natural talent to be the next Bisa Butler, I really mean it. the way that Audrey can look at something and design an entire quilt that looks like a paint by number pattern. And these kids aren't tracing anything, like they're freehand drawing it. And so to see these kids and their eye for color and their eye for, color theory and perception, and even just, their drawing abilities alone, they could be the next Bisa Butler. They just need parents like mine, or they need a community of mentors to help sponsor their fabric and help sponsor, trips to the fabric store and help sponsor them to create, mess up and still, not give up on them. Audrey is just an amazingly talented 17-year-old. This is her second quilt that she ever made. Her first one is called Exit Wound, and it's equally remarkable. In addition to kids making quilts, we also have kids that make quilts and then they become facilitators. So this is Bianca. Bianca is 17 years old in this photo, and she is one of the kids who flies to different schools to lead workshops herself. And so how she did that, we went through like a few weeks of training. This is the curriculum. This is how you ask questions, because at the end of the day, it's not a curriculum where we're, banking style teaching kids. Like, we're not depositing info into you. We're facilitating discussions, and we're prompting, and we're starting, conversations about these issues to then inspire kids. And then you give an art framework on suggested best practices. But really, we just let kids create. And this is the quilt that Bianca single-handedly made over the summer. And so for her to make this quilt, she made a quilt block in one workshop, and she's like, yeah, I get it's going to be part of a community quilt, but I want to make my own quilt. So I was like, okay, I can give you a bunch of blocks. And so I gave her a bunch of blocks, and this is the quilt she made. And what's interesting is all her letters are associated to a letter of the alphabet that, she cares about. And so the embroidery on these blocks, let's just take a look at the collaboration. U is for undocumented. Underneath it says the land of the original people in Spanish. H is for Holocaust. The frame, or like this fence that she wanted embroidered in, basically says, I don't know how to say it right, so I'm not going to butcher it, but it means work will set you free. And these numbers are real numbers that were ironed onto people in the internment camp. And that was done through a lot of research on the embroidery artist's part. And so when I talk about this collaboration, why all these pieces and moving pieces and people are so important, it's really an intentional intergenerational collaboration between youth artists and embroidery artists who are equally talented, and hand skilled with needlework. And then not to mention the long arming on this P is for white privilege block, has long armed arrows pointing to this silhouette. The long arming in this block has dollar signs in the sky talking about the ramifications, with this echo around the word ramifications of displacement, and how disproportionately, particularly in the Bay Area, how so many people communities they've lived in all their life. School to prison pipeline, again, a jail bar on one side, graduation on the other side. We can talk about the correlation. My day job, I work in Fairfield in a jail, and the amount of people that are in jail that don't have a high school diploma clearly shows that an intervention needs to start somewhere. Because at this point, last year, it was 76% of inmates that came into Claybank Detention Center in downtown Fairfield jails all didn't have a high school diploma. So I mean, there's correlated things. Not having a diploma can often lead to choices that might, in a lifestyle that might land you in jail. And even in this vote or block, we all saw, with Atlanta, there's certain votes that fit into the block easily, and other groups are disenfranchised. And so having a circle fit into a square, entry box is obviously going to be a bit more challenging than having, a square fit into the box. But there's so many blocks that I could show you, and so many artist statements. We don't have time for all of them, but I'd encourage you to look on the website. We have a gallery guide that has a lot of statements. And really, we just have a lot of youth statements on the website. This was a quilt made in Baltimore. Bianca's actually led this workshop. And I think what was so interesting is it was a disproportionately Black class. It was a disproportionately underfunded school. The workshop was in February, and they had no heaters. So half the kids did this workshop with gloves on. And I'll never forget her saying wow, it was just an interesting eye opener to how some Title I schools, expect kids to go there and learn when the classroom is 32 degrees. And so little things like that. But I think what was important to note in some of the things that I learned from reading their artist statements is when Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore, Baltimore obviously rioted, they looted, they broke things. America cares about money. So if if murder keeps happening, if you hurt capitalism, perhaps next time you might get some justice, is how a lot of people feel. But I think what was so important is the president of CVS said, oh, well, if the thugs in Baltimore don't appreciate our stores, then we just don't need to have them there. And he pulled all the CVSs from all inner city Baltimore's. And so as you drive around Baltimore, and this is again 2017, you can see all these, empty CVSs that used to be there. And I think that these kids, hearing that their city was called thugs when they were, obviously acting out of rage. And I mean, not even all the kids were at the protests, but I'm sure the sentiments were the same. The inner city is just as important, and save the hood. And our city is beautiful too. I think, listening to them talk about their city, particularly on a national scale, and hearing how, disproportionately disrespectful and, unfortunate people are with, how they talk about their city, it has an effect on their self-confidence, it has an effect on their self-esteem to come from an inner city that everyone talks so poorly about. And I had never, even realized that, because I live in the Bay Area. No one really talks bad about, many cities. So even looking at the difference between what private schools or more affluent schools create to what inner city schools create, this is a workshop we did in Walnut Creek. The kids were absolutely amazing, but just given an example, these were made by 2 students, and one says obviously stop animal cruelty, one says skip the straw, save a turtle. And again, both animal cruelty and plastic pollution, saving animals and ocean safety, all those things matter, and no one's ever denying that. But I often notice that the proximity to socioeconomic privilege plays out in the type of art and illustration that these kids create. Another, going back to Action Project, this is one of the kids that this project was funded by the San Jose Quilt and Textile Museum. Mila made this quilt on educational inequality. We're all born equal, but schools can, often decide, who we are and our fate that we can go. And she talked about, being married to, someone, and her mom was married to someone, and she was going to like a Stanford elementary school. And then I think her mom divorced, and they had to move to like east side of Palo Alto, or a different, socioeconomic side, because was her mom's income alone, and her school was just completely underfunded, and she didn't realize how much taxing played into educational equality, of like coming from a school where you all had MacBooks and new curriculum to coming to a school where you had outdated textbooks. Her thing was, I want kids to all be able to have equal educational opportunities, equal access to AP classes. So her action project was creating backpacks and filling them with new school supplies for 3rd graders. So not only did she give all these kids backpacks, she also gave them like a handwritten note and her mom's business card, and she offered tutoring for all these kids in East Palo Alto. So this is an example of like, we give kids money, opportunity, and often mentorship to do more than just make art quilts about it, but then to go and do something for the community or the issue that their art quilt is about. These are some examples of things that race structure, and this is just because in a Chicago workshop, if I had to synthesize a lot of the artist statements that are heard, Chirac, his artist statement was about how Chicago was a war zone, stop the shooting and stop police brutality. There's so many things, and because I want to be able to get our items, talk a bit about white privilege, particularly in the quilting industry and sewing world, and even quilt guilds as smaller communities. Quilting has a really prominent subculture of white supremacy that's seen in more examples than one. But one quick example that I want to just highlight is we had an exhibit at Paducah at the beginning of last year. It was in January, right kind of before COVID hit, and it was like we had some community quilts in there, and one thing that the museum asked us to do is to come up with a block of the month for their designer program, because everyone's making like a sampler, but the blocks were supposed to reflect the current exhibit. So, okay, we gave them all these community quilts. We had 50 plus issues that they had. And so I'm like, what is one block that we can do to kind of synthesize, what SJSA quilt blocks are about? And so one block that I thought was really PG. I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want to do gun violence or abortion rights or school to prison pipeline or school shootings or equal rights or even, environment. I wanted to just, do a block that I thought every kid would agree with. So, I talked to this kid, his name was Leland. I got permission to ask if I could turn his design into a pattern. And then because the block had to be 10 inches, I changed the word from inequality to injustice, but staying still his design. We made a paper piecing so it could, have some technique, as, raw edge applique is kind of easy for the type of quilters that are following this project. So we turned the block into injustice. We dropped the pattern. Leland was so excited that his pattern and his block design was going to become, a pattern. Like, I think that was one of the biggest things of affirmation that we could do for a kid. Not only is your initial raw design amazing, but we're going to make it into a pattern where other talented adults are going to make your pattern. And Leland added himself to this group. He was, through the moon, excited. And as soon as the day the block came out, January 1st, man, we were just berated with just I mean, just it was just inappropriate comments. And I'd say not only inappropriate comments on the Facebook, but inappropriate emails. This is inappropriate. I don't like political issues. I don't like political causes. They need to keep politics out of quilting. This was a big mistake. Um, all sorts of, stuff. And I think more importantly, people didn't like the block so much, they changed the entire design. I think this was like, it was just kind of eye-opening to how overt racism could be in the community. As SJSA, we're kind of intentionally surrounded by people who support and appreciate the mission of what we're doing, so we're definitely kind of shielded from the outer, more conservative perhaps quilt community. But I'll never forget the emails that were coming in and how inappropriate SJSA was, and how you're inundating kids with political message, and there's no such thing as racism anymore, there's nothing that the blacks can't do, and all sorts of things. And this one was a kicker, because she was really rude in all her emails. And she was just like, we just need to be nice. You don't need justice in the world anymore. People just need to be nice. I think something that really resonated with me that MLK said is justice is love in action. And realizing that it's more than just being nice. Being nice isn't going to get people voting rights. Being nice isn't going to end slavery. Being nice isn't going to stop voter disenfranchisement. Being nice isn't going to fix some of these social issues that have plagued America since the creation of this nation. And so to kind of hear adults that are, and these aren't just random adults, these are principals, these are nurses, these are retired people who worked with a lot of communities. It was just so interesting how the word injustice offended so many people. And so people weren't really making it. So I went to our Instagram and I asked our community, can you please go make this block in solidarity with Leland? Can you make this block? Because a lot of people are making their own version of the block, and Leland's not really feeling, really affirmed. And so SJSA community, they show up and they show out. They made this block. People who couldn't make this block crocheted this block. People who couldn't paper piece embroidered this block. One lady said, I can't even sew, I'm going to go tat this block. And so not only did it become a tattoo, but people really, Leland was just over the moon, and no other block of the month from Paducah's entire history has been tattooed. So, that was definitely a big plus. But more importantly, just to kind of counter some of that racism in the community with affirmation really meant a lot, cross stitching, et cetera, et cetera. Then all these other kids started emailing, can you turn my block into a pattern? I want to be a pattern too. And so I'm like, oh man, what did we just open? So we opened up this can of worms. So of course we're going to eat it. We made all these other kids' blocks into patterns. We made this whole, just block of the month, 2020 series of just creating blocks that kids have made. We'll give it to an adult who can make step out, take photos, and make it a pattern. This one is on gentrification, draining the color out. And then moving forward, our new project, there's two of them. One's called Quilts of Remembrance. And what Quilts of Remembrance is we're making full quilts for families who've lost a loved one to brutality, loved one to community violence, lost a loved one because of LGBTQIA violence. We're just making quilts for families who are mourning, families who are hurt, in an act of solidarity. And so what this looks like, Junior was killed by police in LA. His family sent us some of his clothes and some of his photos. And then we connected the clothes and photos to a volunteer who we had an interview with Junior's family. Blue was his favorite color, one of his favorite quotes. We just got info and then we gave it to the quilter. And that quilter, spent 2 months and created an entire quilt top from start to finish, binding and all, and made a quilt top to just give to Junior's family. Because he was here, his life was stolen, unfortunately. But turning clothes into a quilt is something that the family cannot forever use. And so more than Junior, at this point, we've made quilts for over 75 families, and we have more families waiting. So I hope that if any of you are moved to do so, you sign up to make a full quilt. And so this one is Cameron Lamb, who was killed in his garage by police as a case of mistaken identity. The family, when we shipped the quilt to his mom, the family was there to watch her open it. This is his family right here, and right here are his 2 sons. When you take, someone from a family, not only are you, orphaning these kids, but it's a pillar of the community. This is someone's son, this is someone's dad, this is someone's coworker, this is someone's brother. This is someone's, uncle, nephew. There's so many people. And I think often, when we hear about these murders, we're only hearing about their last final moments. And Kansas City has given the mom $2 million. Oops, our bad. But it's more than the money. Don't take, these lives. We can't keep having these accidents. But when I say, this was his favorite hoodie, and we only got one hoodie. This was his favorite hoodie. And then these red pieces are his hoodie fabric cut up into it. His nickname was Chevy Boy because he was really big on making cars and fixing cars. It's a pretty emotional, task to be giving these families these quilts. People cry, people have shrines set up in their house. Moms still want justice for their kid, regardless of what year or what month they were murdered. This is Daniel. He was killed in LA. This is his family, who was, again, appreciative. This is the t-shirt he worked for, the company he worked for, through his favorite teams. And then she embroidered, a patch of who it was made for. Purple was his favorite color. But then if you don't have the quilt skills or even time to make a full quilt, we've got another option that you can get involved. We have what's called the SJSA Remembrance Project. And in short, I'd say the Remembrance Project is a 2021 version of the AIDS quilt with a much wider scope. In the sense of, we have 4 categories. There's 1, police brutality, and it wouldn't even just be police brutality. I'd say it's death by law enforcement. That could be a mall cop. That could be a security guard who gets, who kills someone on accident. But really, and then there's racial vigilantism, which is like Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, and there's a lot of people who've been killed after 9/11 for just racially motivated attacks for wearing, a head covering or something. And then there's LGBT domestic violence, identity politics who get killed. So those are the 4 broad umbrella categories. And in this, kind of project, you sign up, we send you a name, and then you get the name and you research, who was this person, what were their likes, what were their dislikes, who were they as a person. It's not even an art project, but it's really a heart project, because these blocks are really humanizing, who these people were and the future and the potential of what they could have been. This guy, Tony, was a 19-year-old. He was hanging out with his friends in Madison, Wisconsin. He did shrooms with his friends, and he was having a bad trip. So his friends walked him into his apartment, and he was still not doing well. So they called the police as a wellness check to check on their friend. The police came in and killed their friend in his own apartment while he was having a trip, in a bad reaction to acid. He was a skateboarder, and his friends held a lot of skateboard, protests. Justice has not been served, and this happened March 2015. These are more examples. You can do a portrait, Alton Sturden, you can cross stitch it. Really, we only need the size requirement, which I believe is like 20.5 by 24.5. And this was a graduate. He was 1 month shy of his graduation, and he was naked, unarmed, having a serious mental health break. If someone is naked, guess what? You can see that they're unarmed. Who needs to shoot someone that is booty butt naked? Like, police, being so trigger happy, it's really an epidemic, and it's really just an intentional slow genocide at this point. The fact that we have trials for murders that all of America has watched for the most part, in the case of George Floyd, shows how flawed, not only our justice system, but more so our accountability system is, although, a bit of accountability was in this case, but it's not a police project, and it's not a BLM project. This 8-year-old was killed as a random drive-by bullet. This artist painted his face, and so this guy had, I think, like 22 rings in this tree, because that's how many lives he lived. This girl met someone on Twitter or on like Tumblr or Pinterest or something, because she was a little houseless. She was an activist. She was killed by some random guy that she met up with. And there's just so many stories, so many names. I'd encourage you to go to the Instagram where you can learn more about these people. You can see some of the finished pieces, and you can really learn about who they were, and any type of effect you can do to possibly get justice for them. There are a lot of transgender LGBTQIA. Jordan Edwards was a baby when he was killed. This person embroidered all these words in the background. It looks like it's just a wrinkled block, but it's all this hand embroidery. Summer Taylor was a girl who was protesting at a BLM protest in like Oregon, and some racist ran through the protest with his truck, struck and killed Summer, as a white ally who was just helping, advocate for BLM. Oscar Grant, for those who were in the Bay, know what happened to him. And Keith Notice was killed in Portland. And every month on the anniversary of his death, they have a candlelight vigil in his honor. And that's been happening since his death. John Crawford III, there's just so many names, and there's so many stories. I could be here for hours, but just kind of seeing, we have thousands of names on our list to memorialize. And right now we have 0 volunteers, because when we get volunteers, we send the names out pretty rapidly. So I'd really encourage you to sign up. If you have the time, make a full quilt for a family. If you don't, that's okay. You can make a block in their honor. These are what the banners look like when we get them back. And again, you can see right here the color coding. These, this batch of people, a lot of them: blue, killed by some form of law enforcement; purple, killed by LGBTQIA domestic violence; yellow, killed by community; I believe, random like drive-by for this young girl that was murdered. And you can see their names, you can see quotes, you can see poems that they may have written. Again, it's not an art project, it's really just a heart project. So it doesn't, there's no skill or expectation on what you create. It's just the only requirement is that the block has their name and is the right size. Even in sharing this project, we reach out to our field because again, we have thousands of names, and every weekend our list of who needs to be memorialized gets longer because these people are getting killed, just left and right. And so Warfield posted, just a block of Breonna Taylor to say, hey, this is a project going on, encourage their community to sign up to make a block. And the comments that, proliferated through this post, how about you celebrate the real heroes instead of praising another dead thug? This is an avid quilter. I really should have, hashtagged her business, but who calls Breonna Taylor a woman killed while sleeping in their apartment, another dead thug? And I only share this to really share, like there's a really high subculture, like a prevalent culture of racism, white supremacy in the quilting industry. And so I think, being aware, acknowledging it, and then realizing what you can do to become more anti-racist, what you can do to speak up, know that silence is violence. And if we let these comments, just troll out posts, we're saying that it's okay to say those things. And so there really needs to be an accountability of seeing something, saying something, and really just standing up for people who obviously they're not here anymore, or else they could stand up for themselves. What can you do? You can follow, you can listen, you can notice patterns, you consider where your quilt dollars are going, you can support, you can hold companies accountable. Last summer, everyone made, for the most part, except for a few companies that, I'm not going to cancel culture call out, but a lot of companies made BLM statements of solidarity. But since then, besides an Instagram post, what have you done? So asking, your shops, your statements, what are you doing? How are you becoming inclusive? What are you doing, to just create not only an inclusive space, but recognizing that diversity is an outcome, but belonging isn't, is a sense and it's a feeling. Diversity is quantitative. You can have a few people of color on a board, but that doesn't mean that it's inclusive or other things. So just kind of recognizing that if we say something and if we can create the industry that we want to be in, and if we want to move the needle forward in an anti-racist and really intentional community, we've all got to play our part to do something. Ways to get involved with SJSA. We have an amazing Facebook learning community where we post learning. We have a resource guidebook on our website that I encourage people to read. I'd encourage you to make a quilt, make a banner if you don't have time to make a quilt, donate fabric, scissors, basting glue, monetarily, schedule an exhibition. We've got banners, we've got quilts. If you work at a library, community center, college, anything, we can bring quilts anywhere. Shipping is kind of expensive, but once you see the quilts, it's kind of worth the shipping. And so with that being said, are there any questions?
There are a lot of questions. So we are going to stay on a few more minutes because we did have a lot of questions that I would like for Sara to answer. I told you you were in for an inspiring morning. Wait till you see the chat, Sara. Amazing. Thank you. Really, everybody wants to know how can they have a program, a Sewing for Change in their area. They want to try it in their area, Canada, US. Can they be facilitated virtually? Is there a workshop guide? How
you can reach out. So we have an executive director named Lauren. Her email is lauren@SJS Academy. If you'd like to facilitate or become a guide, definitely reach out. We have the Train the Trainers, where it's like she kind of does Zoom trainings, and we can kind of partner. We've got schools all over everywhere that are asking for in-person workshops. Even if you just reach out, hey, I'm in Minneapolis, and you reach out. When we get a school in Minneapolis, we know, hey, we have a potential trainer there. Can you train it? Can you go to this workshop? So there's all sorts of that. We have homeless shelters reaching out. We have juvenile halls. Are you willing to do a background check? Can you get fingerprinted? Really, your dedication to how far and how many you're willing to do, is up to you. But we've got requests for programming all the time. With COVID, things have definitely moved a bit virtually. So we'd love to have more virtual facilitators. Feel free to shoot us an email. If you have that time experience. There is a bit of a training where it's like we show you the curriculum. We kind of go over, what if a kid says this, and but for the most part, it's really conversation guided, and it's kind of providing prompts in the space for young people to talk. Internationally, we'd love it. So definitely just shoot us an email. We can.
And same thing, shoot you an email if they'd like to have an exhibition of some quilts. Okay, great.
Exhibition would be Stephanie, STEPHANIE @sjsacademy.com. She does exhibitions. Lauren does workshops and programming.
Great, your team, amazing. We did put a chat. People also want to know how they can sign up to volunteer to embroider. There was a link in the chat. Maybe we could have a screenshot at the very end of this recorded lecture with all of these to volunteer, to have an exhibition, to have a workshop, so that people can go. And I assume if they go to your website, it's clear.
Yeah, everything's on the website, but
Yeah.
and on the Instagram, there's always volunteer options. For those who are in the Bay Area, we have sew days every 2 months. And when the museum opens up, I'd love to have some in San Jose, Nancy, where we can just piece banners. We can piece, because we've got hundreds of kids' blocks, and then like it takes a lot of time to turn them into quilts. So when things are open up and it's safe enough, let's have some sew days at the museum for those who are like in San Jose, and let's come there. Everyone bring a sewing machine. We bring the kids' blocks, and we've got to, like, make the quilts at a timely fashion. I saw a question: do the kids get the kids? They can definitely opt in. When kids make blocks, they get the option to keep it or turn it in. Most kids always opt to turn it in because they want it to be seen. One thing that we always make sure we do is the school or community center or juvenile hall or wherever made the quilt, like the kids that made the quilt, they always get to see it first. So like when it goes through the embroidery process, when it goes through the make the top process, when it gets long arm, they get the opening, like, we've made this. They take photos with it, they show it. Because it's such an easy lending library, if they ever want the quilt back, they just reach out and they do it. But for the most part, kids are given the option. You can keep this block, post it on social media, keep it hanging up, do what you want with it, or you can like contribute it to this project and it will be seen nationally all year long. And obviously their names, are associated and
We'll be
credited.
ready to host a workshop in San Jose very soon. So I have heard some of the wonderful success stories of some of your students, and people were wondering, do you keep in touch with the students? I'm thinking of a particular couple I've heard of you. Can you just tell us an example of someone who came and was maybe like not sure they wanted to do this, and then
Juan,
a real for you?
Yeah, I'd say Juan. There's a I don't know where there's an audio thing. I'll see if I can find it in a minute, but there's like I can drop the audio recording so you can hear from these kids directly. But Juan was on Ankle Monitor and he did the 2016 summer program, and he was like, I don't want to sew. This is for girls. This is for grandmas. I'm a graffiti artist. I don't like this. And I think after kind of explaining the why and then explaining this is the process, but this is the outcome. And kind of explaining you're going to make a quilt so it can be seen in exhibits and you can talk about your art, you can talk about his experience. And he had been pushed out of his apartment, undocumented parents, over 2-3 times as a result of gentrification, but more importantly, like rent abuse, and just like, oh, we're going to call ICE on you guys. And so like they moved in with family, and because of his lack of housing instability, he didn't graduate high school until he was like 20 and a half. And it's because transferring from 6 different high schools, all his credits aren't aligning. And so like just kind of understanding his lived experience, his quilt is on gentrification. It's got someone like kneeling and a pink slip and a building on fire. And his quilt's very, urban, graffiti looking, like it's literally urban. It's very graffiti style. It's almost like Banksy was kind of his inspo. But like just hearing his lived experience in conjunction with his art, he became really excited to make the art because he wanted his voice heard, because he wanted to talk about his experience, because he wanted to have people listen to understand. These are things you can do to stop evictions. These are things you can do to help undocumented people with housing. I think people care, and I say people, I think most artists care about an outcome, and they're willing and excited to make art about it if they can get the outcome and start that conversation.
Yeah, that's great. So one last question, and this one's for you. So how is Social Justice Sewing Academy funded? Everybody here, it is funded by people like you. So for those of you who put, my heart is racing with excitement, Sara, your work is amazing, I'm speechless, go to the website, click on the donate link. It's people like you who make it happen. It does take money. It also takes volunteers. So put your money where your mouth is. And so the answer to that question is right. How can you support? Go to the website. Sara, is there anything that you want to tell us that you haven't already told us?
No, I would just say right now, the Remembrance Project, we've got so many names that need to be memorialized. I would say if you guys have, and again, the time it takes, you could paper piece something, you could digitize something, you could applicate something, you could improv, like we have
make a pattern.
Anything. We have so many names that need to be memorialized for this project, from the Bay, there's just so many names, and our name list keeps growing at a rate that our volunteer list isn't. So if anyone, and we've got families that are shipping in clothes. I've got 4 boxes of clothes here now that they're a victim's clothes. There's jeans, there's hoodies, there's robe. If you have the time to make a full quilt, please sign up. We'll contact you. We'll let you know, who your person is. We'll give you the detail. We'll ship you the clothes, and good luck. It's definitely a heavy project, but I can't explain to you in pictures or even in words how much this means to these families.
That's really moving. Yeah. Send the postage, people, so she can send you the clothing. Anyway, Sarah, thank you so much. Every time I hear you talk, or any, whether it's for 5 minutes or 50 minutes, I am just so inspired. I'm breathless. So I want to thank our sponsors also for supporting this wonderful event. We'll wait for that slide to come up. Thank you, because we could not do it without you. And again, support the Social Justice Sewing Academy. If you've loved this, also send it a little extra to the sponsoring organization would be great. We'll see you next week with a presentation from the Modern Quilt Guild. And thank you so much. Take care. Thank you, everybody.